It's not a zero-sum game. There's no evidence that the rise of women is responsible for the fall of men, but we are seeing many men struggling, even as many women are doing better in the labor market and in the world in general. And so we can think two thoughts at once. We can think there's more to do for girls and women, but still we should pay attention to some of these problems of boys and men.
Is this a problem unique to the United States?
In this conversation 11 months ago on CNN, you start seeing a crystallization of a real issue, not just in America, but across the first world. Now that most of the first world has made great successes in order to aid the quality of life for women via feminism, it has coincided with deindustrialization and difficulties for young men, namely because many of them don't see the same spoils of dating that their parents and grandparents saw. This correlates across the first world, even where I am in Japan. But in this part of the conversation, Richard Reeves explains what makes America special in particular.
Is this a problem unique to the United States?
No, most of the trends that you've just identified at the top of the segment are true everywhere. So in every advanced economy, there are now more women with a college degree than men. In the US, it's 60-40 for women. The US is unusual in that the economic position of men seems to have been hit particularly hard. So most American men today earn less than most American men did in 1979. That's a fairly extraordinary economic fact, and that's not true across the world. And so the economic changes seem to have hit American men harder than in other countries.
One unfortunate offshoot of the growing economic prosperity for women in the shadow of a greater percentage of men not being quote-unquote viable mates is that two ways of looking at this problem have established themselves. One is a form of empathy or concern about how can we make these men more viable and incorporate them into society in a way that they are not only productive, but that modern women would want to marry and establish stable families with them. This, of course, is the million-dollar question. But in the midst of this question, there are many people looking for a viable answer because they understand what's really at risk. And as a Gen Xer, someone who has experienced relationships and seen the new difficulty that's arisen with modern dating via the cell phone, I too understand and can see what's really at stake. And full generations of men are living with full relationship access at all.
Our young boys now who are hearing from the time they are, sentient basically, that they are inherently, there's something wrong with them or there's something bad. They need to temper themselves and tame themselves a little bit. What is the impact of terms like toxic masculinity?
It's shame and it's rage, and to not acknowledge that we're having an important conversation about the continuum of sexuality, and we need to acknowledge that everyone along that continuum deserves a certain amount of dignity and respect.
It feels like these are just dateless men who are like trying to legislate their way into being able to force themselves to have a wife, Is that what it is?
Look at those people that speak. Do you look at them? Every time they come on, I'm like, oh, yeah, it's obvious you feel that way. Y'all all look crazy.
And equal rights, but also to embrace our, those among us who are binary, to embrace masculinity. Masculinity is a wonderful thing. And essentially on the far left, we've decided that masculinity is being more feminine.
To the women that have done so much for us, to even exist, I did that. I robbed some women of their baby-making years, dragging them along. They built me up.
And yet the majority of women will say that they want men to initiate romantic interest. 75% of women still consider economic viability a key consideration in selecting a mate. It's only 25% for women. So while the world wants the positive aspects of masculinity, young people are told that masculinity is a negative.
When I think of the West and what worries me about the future of it, nothing gives me more fear than the fact that in the West, there is a lessening of the respect for not just the power of masculinity, but what can happen when the power of masculinity is no longer respected. There is a saying that men long to be respected more than to be loved. But what does it look like when a generation of men can no longer expect to be respected? It looks like jokes that come from comedians that sound like this.
Don't
It's
nobody
like an
want to be
incel
with y'all.
thing,
So,
is it?
So any other way to get us to have to be, like I saw this thing today that was just like, oh, well, you know, there's like 30% of 30-year-olds haven't had sex in a year.
saw that.
Like, what? So that's our fault? That's our fault. So what you do in reaction to that is take our rights away instead of maybe send them to a dating class? Maybe like, you know, get Chuck Woolery up in here or something? What the?
One thing I'm noticing recently with a lot of comedy is that it seems to poke fun at young men who have not had a lot of relationships. And I think this is especially dangerous because as Gen Xers, we have had the opportunity to date, and we know if we don't smell good or if we are not appealing or if we need to brush our teeth. But sometimes we were able to attract women even though we were shorter or not as attractive because we didn't have the cell phones in our hand. But to tell a young generation of men now that they are not successful because they're not matching people on their cell phones, as standards have gotten so high that many of these men have never even experienced a loving relationship. Part of me worries, what happens if you have a full generation or two of men who have never even felt what love feels like? Their only idea of love is how much money they're going to spend on a date with me. And when that becomes what relationships are, and guys don't either care to be in one or they see relationships as burdens, making fun of those gentlemen is not going to have an outcome for society that's going to be a good one. Many other societies have checks against that by saying you're valuable as a man because we know what men can do. But in the West, that seems to be absent. And that worries me. In the light of all of this, I hope that men have a positive portrayal of masculinity. But in that, women should also understand that there are some men that see masculinity in a way that can only be checked by other men. I would hope that woke women truly understand that fact. Anyways, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, comment below. I'll catch you in the next video. Take care, guys.